Scattered across modern Italy lie cities that trace their origins to a mysterious and influential people known as the Etruscans. These early builders not only laid the foundation for what would become some of the most important urban centers in the region, but also heavily influenced the cultural and political fabric of ancient Rome itself. In fact, Roman traditions, from religious ceremonies to military organization, owe much to Etruscan precedents. The Latin alphabet we know today is essentially a variation of the one used by the Etruscans, and even the final kings of Rome were of Etruscan descent. The legendary foundation of Rome, shrouded in myth, was said to follow Etruscan rites, and the Romans inherited numerous artistic and spiritual customs from them. Names like Sergio, still used in modern times, have their roots in Etruscan nobility, particularly from families such as the Sergi. These traces remind us that Etruscan influence wasn't just temporary, it became woven into the legacy of the Western world. Yet despite their immense contribution to history, the origins of the Etruscans have long remained a subject of mystery and debate. Who were these people? Where did they come from? And why did their unique culture eventually vanish into the folds of Roman dominance? Among the earliest theories about Etruscan origins is the account provided by Herodotus, the famed Greek historian, who believed that they were migrants from Lydia in Asia Minor. He noted similarities in culture and customs between the Etruscans and certain Eastern civilizations, suggesting that they may have crossed the sea and settled in Italy. However, modern archaeology casts doubt on this idea. One of the most glaring contradictions is the absence of early Etruscan settlements along the coastline, an odd omission for a people supposedly arriving by sea. Furthermore, the Etruscans adopted the Greek alphabet instead of importing their own native script, which raises questions about their supposed foreign origin. Recent genetic studies add another layer to the mystery. They show that the genetic split between the populations of prehistoric Asia Minor and ancient Italy occurred long before the Etruscans emerged, dating as far back as the Neolithic era. This data challenges the narrative of a recent migration from the East. Instead, evidence increasingly supports the view that the Etruscans evolved locally, deeply rooted in the prehistoric communities of the Italian peninsula, with their culture shaped gradually by contact and exchange with neighbors like the Greeks and Phoenicians. And just like the mystery surrounding the Etruscans, our journey through ancient civilizations is still unfolding. If you're enjoying this exploration and would like to help us uncover more stories like this one, consider subscribing to the channel. We're aiming to reach 1,000 subscribers by June 30th, and every single new supporter brings us one step closer. Dionysius of Halicarnassus, a Roman historian writing in the 1st century BC, was among the first to suggest that the Etruscans were indigenous to Italy. While this idea was long dismissed as mere political propaganda, especially given that Augustus, Rome's first emperor, claimed Etruscan ancestry, modern evidence increasingly backs Dionysius's assertion. Archaeological discoveries reveal a strong continuity between the Etruscans and the earlier Villanovan culture, which flourished during the Iron Age in central Italy. In fact, the main difference between a late Villanovan burial and an early Etruscan tomb is often the presence of writing. When inscriptions are found, the burial is labeled Etruscan. When absent, it's considered Villanovan. This subtle transition suggests that the Etruscan civilization was not a sudden import from abroad, but rather the result of local cultural evolution. Other hypotheses have been floated as well. Some propose that the Etruscans came from the Alps or even migrated from Sardinia, but these remain speculative. The architectural and cultural disparities between Sardinian structures and those in Etruria, for example, weaken such theories. Instead, the most plausible scenario is that the Etruscans were native to the region, gradually influenced by external contact. The rise of Etruscan civilization appears to be a blend of internal development and selective external influence, particularly from the Phoenicians and Greeks. This interaction began around the 9th and 8th centuries BC, coinciding with the period when these Mediterranean powers began venturing into Italian waters. The Villanovan culture, believed to be the precursor to the Etruscans, started to show signs of transformation around this time. Burial practices began to change. Cremation, which had been the norm, gradually gave way to inhumation, the practice of burying whole bodies. This marked a broader cultural shift that signaled the emergence of a new, more complex society. Roman legends even echo this cultural fusion. One early Roman king, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, is said to have been of mixed heritage, part Greek, part Etruscan. As trade networks expanded and local communities encountered new goods, technologies, and beliefs, a uniquely Etruscan identity began to take form. What emerged was a civilization that was distinctly Italian in origin, yet cosmopolitan in character, drawing from, but not dominated by, the influences of its neighbors. One of the main reasons the Etruscans remain such a fascinating enigma is that their language, although partially understood, has never been fully deciphered. While they used a version of the Greek alphabet for their inscriptions, the structure and vocabulary of their language are entirely distinct from Indo-European tongues. Linguists have identified around 400 Etruscan words with some level of confidence. But beyond that, most interpretations remain speculative. The language appears to be agglutinative, meaning it forms words by combining roots with a series of prefixes, suffixes, and affixes. This grammatical complexity adds to the difficulty of translation. Complicating matters further is the fact that the vast majority of surviving texts are extremely short and repetitive, mostly epitaphs or ritual dedications. Inscriptions often include phrases like, "Here lies," or "I, name," dedicate this to God, providing limited context for understanding grammar or vocabulary. Only a handful of Etruscan texts exceed 50 words, and most offer little in the way of narrative structure or syntactical clues. Scholars are thus left with fragments and assumptions, making the study of the Etruscan language a puzzle with far too few pieces. Among the most remarkable discoveries related to Etruscan writing is the so-called Liber Linteus, or Linen Book, which is the longest Etruscan text ever found. This unique document survived in an unexpected way. It was repurposed in ancient Egypt as mummy wrappings. In the 19th century, a Croatian officer named Mihajlo Baric purchased a mummy and its sarcophagus in Alexandria, unaware of the treasure wrapped around it. When the artifact arrived at the Zagreb Museum, researchers noticed faint writing on the linen strips. For years, the script went unidentified until it was eventually recognized as Etruscan. The text appears to be a religious calendar, referencing festivals, divine names, and rituals tied to specific months. Though the book's content remains only partially deciphered, it has offered invaluable insight into Etruscan religious life. What makes the Liber Linteus especially important is its length and coherence. It's one of the few extended pieces of writing that gives scholars a chance to observe patterns in sentence construction and vocabulary. Despite these advantages, however, the absence of any Rosetta Stone-style bilingual translation continues to stall full comprehension. Excitement surged in the scholarly community in 1961 when a potential breakthrough emerged: the discovery of the Pyrgi tablets. These were 3 thin gold leaves, 2 of which bore inscriptions, one in Phoenician and the other in Etruscan. Hopes were high that this could be the Etruscan equivalent of the Rosetta Stone. Unfortunately, those hopes were tempered once researchers realized that the texts were not direct translations. The Etruscan version was notably longer than the Phoenician, limiting any one-to-one comparison of vocabulary or syntax. Nonetheless, the tablets confirmed the existence of close ties between the Etruscans and Phoenician culture, particularly in the context of religion and trade. The inscription is a dedication to the goddess Uni, paralleling the Phoenician text that honors Astarte. This connection not only illuminated shared deities across cultures, but also reinforced theories that Etruscan belief systems were influenced by contact with the broader Mediterranean world. While the Pyrgi tablets didn't unlock the Etruscan language, they did offer rare cultural insights and helped place Etruria more firmly within the complex web of ancient Mediterranean civilizations. Scholars have identified two other ancient languages that may be related to Etruscan: Rhaetian, once spoken in the Alpine regions, and Lemnian, found on the Aegean island of Lemnos. Ancient authors sometimes referred to the Rhaetians as mountain Etruscans, implying a shared ancestry or cultural lineage. Likewise, the Greeks used the term Tyrrhenians to describe both the Etruscans and the Lemnians. This linguistic overlap has intrigued researchers, but the evidence remains thin. Only a handful of short inscriptions survive in both Rhaetian and Lemnian, and their contents are typically too brief to yield meaningful conclusions. Even so, the possibility of a broader Tyrrhenian language family suggests that the Etruscans may have once been part of a more widespread linguistic and cultural group stretching across parts of Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. If true, this would significantly broaden the historical context in which we understand their origins. Yet until more substantial texts are uncovered, such connections remain largely speculative. For now, the Etruscan language stands as a linguistic island, tantalizingly close to comprehension, yet persistently elusive. The deeper origins of the Etruscan civilization may stretch back even further than the Villanovan culture, reaching into the late Bronze Age. Around the 12th century BC, the so-called Urnfield culture expanded into the Italian peninsula. In Italy, this is often referred to as the Proto-Villanovan phase, characterized by its distinctive burial customs. The dead were cremated, and their ashes stored in biconical urns, ceramic vessels with a shape resembling two cones joined at their bases. These urns were often buried with simple grave goods, suggesting a relatively egalitarian society. Over the next 2 centuries, this culture evolved into the Villanovan civilization, which began to show signs of increasing social complexity. Villanovan settlements, typically built on defensible high ground, housed small communities of several thousand people. Archaeological findings show clear indications of emerging social hierarchies. While some graves remained modest, others were richly furnished with finely crafted pottery, weapons, and ceremonial items. These changes reveal a society in transition, one that was laying the groundwork for a more stratified and urbanized way of life. As external influences grew stronger and local innovations accumulated, the Etruscans began to take shape from these very roots. By the start of the 8th century BC, the Villanovan culture had begun to morph into what we now recognize as distinctly Etruscan. This transformation was fueled largely by increasing contact with the Phoenicians and Greeks. Trade routes flourished, and with them came an influx of exotic goods: bronze tools, luxury items, ornate pottery, and new artistic techniques. The Villanovans exported valuable commodities such as food and iron ore in exchange. It was during this dynamic period of exchange that the first inscriptions in the Etruscan language began to appear. While the spoken form likely existed earlier, it's from this era that we get the first physical traces of written Etruscan. Burial customs also underwent a marked change. The long-standing tradition of cremation began to wane, replaced increasingly by inhumation, the burial of intact bodies. This shift may reflect deeper religious or cultural changes, influenced in part by foreign rituals and beliefs. Small hilltop communities began expanding into fortified cities, boasting more elaborate architectural planning and infrastructure. The rise of urban centers went hand in hand with the flourishing of specialized crafts, from metalwork to pottery. A new civilization was emerging, one that would dominate the region for centuries to come. As Etruscan cities grew, so did their artistic ambition. Initially, Etruscan artisans largely imitated Greek styles, borrowing motifs and techniques to produce goods that resembled their foreign counterparts. But a significant turning point came during the 6th century BC, when the Persian Empire invaded Ionia, prompting a wave of Greek artisans and intellectuals to flee westward. Many of these refugees found a new home in Etruria. Their presence catalyzed a renaissance in Etruscan craftsmanship, inspiring a unique fusion of Hellenic skill and native creativity. Etruscan pottery, already sophisticated, reached a new level of refinement. In some cases, it became nearly indistinguishable from Greek pottery, so much so that modern archaeologists often rely on chemical analysis of the clay to determine its origin. Despite these similarities, the Etruscans also developed their own distinct ceramic style known as bucchero. This pottery was crafted by infusing the clay with soot and then firing it in a low-oxygen environment. The result was a sleek, black surface that gleamed like polished metal. With this innovation, the Etruscans demonstrated not just artistic talent, but a clear desire to cultivate a unique cultural identity, one that could stand beside, not behind, its better-known neighbors. The Etruscans earned a reputation among Greeks and Romans for decadence, though much of this perception stemmed from cultural misunderstanding. One of the most provocative aspects of Etruscan society was the elevated status of women. Unlike in most other ancient Mediterranean civilizations, Etruscan women enjoyed a public presence. They dined with men, drank wine at banquets, and even had their names engraved on tombs and personal objects. To the patriarchal Greeks and early Romans, these customs seemed scandalous, and they interpreted them as signs of moral laxity. But archaeological evidence tells a more balanced story. Erotic themes in Etruscan art are no more prevalent than in Greek. Works and depictions of music, dance, and feasting point, not to excess, but to a culture that valued joy, ritual, and aesthetic expression. The Etruscans were also exceptional jewelers and metalworkers. One example, a tiny pendant of the river god Achelous, reveals a mastery of granulation, with minute gold spheres less than half a millimeter in diameter forming his beard. Their attention to detail and dedication to craft illustrate a refined and sophisticated society. Far from being defined by hedonism, the Etruscans were a people whose vibrancy defied the austere values of their critics. It's these contrasts between perception and reality that make the Etruscan story so compelling. If you're appreciating the depth of these insights and want to keep exploring the hidden layers of history with us, don't forget to like the video and follow the channel. There's so much more ahead. One of the most striking aspects of Etruscan culture was their approach to death and the afterlife. Their burial practices were elaborate and revealed a profound belief in life beyond the grave. The Etruscans constructed necropolises, literally cities of the dead, on the outskirts of their urban centers. These were not just cemeteries, but full-scale architectural complexes, complete with streets, chambers, and homes for the deceased. Tombs often mimicked real houses in their layout and decor, featuring beds, chairs, and domestic objects, all carefully arranged to make the dead feel at home in the next world. Sarcophagi were placed inside, sometimes adorned with lifelike sculptures of the deceased reclining as if attending a banquet. The tomb walls were richly decorated with frescoes depicting scenes of daily life, mythology, and rituals. These paintings provide a rare window into Etruscan aesthetics, fashion, and social customs. Each tomb was then covered by a mound of earth, called a tumulus, creating a landscape of green hills over the burial chambers. The attention and artistry devoted to these tombs suggest that Etruscan beliefs about the afterlife were deeply integrated into their worldview, and that honoring the dead was as important as celebrating life itself. In addition to their artistic and spiritual achievements, the Etruscans developed formidable military and naval capabilities. Though often portrayed as peaceful traders or decadent aristocrats, they were no strangers to warfare. Etruscan city-states frequently clashed with one another in battles that aimed less at conquest and more at capturing spoils, trophies, livestock, crops, and slaves. These localized conflicts helped shape a warrior ethos, even if the Etruscans seldom pursued large-scale territorial expansion. What truly set them apart, however, was their prowess at sea. Etruscan pirates became so notorious along Italy's western coast that by the 7th century BC, Greek and Phoenician merchants avoided sailing beyond Sardinia. The Etruscans are even credited with inventing the naval ram, a bronze-clad projection mounted on the prow of ships designed to pierce enemy hulls. Their warships, known as pentaconters, were sleek, fast, and manned by crews of 50 rowers, making them formidable opponents on the water. Through these innovations, the Etruscans established dominance over the Tyrrhenian Sea, expanded into the Po River Valley, and even founded colonies on islands like Corsica. Though often overshadowed by later Roman achievements, their military contributions laid essential groundwork for Mediterranean naval warfare. By the end of the 7th century BC, Etruscan influence had reached its zenith. Their kings ruled not only over Etruscan cities, but also extended their power southward, even to Rome itself. Though Roman sources rarely state it outright, archaeological and historical evidence suggests that Rome functioned as an Etruscan client state during this period. The last kings of Rome, such as Lucius Tarquinius Priscus and Tarquinius Superbus, were of Etruscan origin, and many Roman institutions, including elements of the Senate, religious rites, and public spectacles, were clearly modeled after Etruscan practices. Rome's infrastructure, from drainage systems to early temples, bore the mark of Etruscan engineering. However, the tide began to turn at the dawn of the 5th century BC. In 509 BC, the Romans overthrew Tarquinius Superbus, ending the monarchy and establishing the Republic. The Etruscans tried to reclaim the city in the ensuing wars, but their efforts failed. Not long after, their dominance over the Tyrrhenian Sea was shattered when their fleet, allied with Carthage, was defeated by Syracuse at the Battle of Cumae in 474 BC. This defeat marked a turning point, ceding maritime supremacy to the Greeks and signaling the beginning of Etruscan decline. As Rome's power grew, the Etruscans faced mounting threats not only from the south, but also from the north. In 396 BC, the Roman army captured Veii, one of the largest and most powerful Etruscan cities, signaling a dramatic shift in the regional balance of power. Veii's fall was particularly symbolic. It had been a cultural and economic rival to Rome for centuries. Soon after, in 387 BC, the Gauls invaded from beyond the Alps, sweeping through Etruria, sacking cities, and even plundering Rome. Despite the scale of the destruction, the Etruscans still failed to unite in common cause. Their society remained a loose confederation of independent city-states, each pursuing its own interests, often at the expense of collective survival. Some Etruscan cities even allied with Rome against their neighbors, hoping to gain short-term advantages. It wasn't until the late 4th century BC that they made a serious attempt at forming a military alliance. But by then, it was too late. The Roman war machine was already too advanced, too organized, and too aggressive. By the early 3rd century BC, most Etruscan cities had been absorbed into the Roman sphere, reduced to the status of client states, and gradually stripped of their autonomy. Once incorporated into the Roman Republic, the Etruscans adapted swiftly to the new political reality. Many of their citizens eventually gained full Roman citizenship, and some even rose to positions of considerable power. At least 2 Roman consuls during the Republic were of Etruscan descent, a testament to their successful integration into Roman society. Despite Rome's earlier hostility, the Etruscans offered little resistance during this transition, perhaps worn down by centuries of warfare and internal division. When Hannibal marched through Italy during the Second Punic War in the late 3rd century BC, he expected oppressed peoples to rise against Rome. But not a single Etruscan city joined him. Their passive stance signaled how thoroughly they had been woven into the Roman fabric. In 27 BC, under Augustus, the region of Etruria became the first non-Roman area in Italy to receive full citizenship status for its people. The Etruscans were no longer a separate identity, but had become Romans in almost every respect. However, rather than being erased, their culture lived on, absorbed into Roman law, religion, and aesthetics. Their tombs still stood, their names were spoken, and their legacy continued to shape the empire that had once subdued them. Even as the Roman Empire reached its height, the Etruscan legacy endured in unexpected ways. Several emperors, including Herennius Etruscus, Hostilian, and even the famed Augustus, were believed to have Etruscan ancestry. Emperor Claudius, in particular, held a deep admiration for Etruscan culture and language. He devoted years of study to it and wrote a 20-volume history of the Etruscans, which, though tragically lost, is known to us through references in other ancient texts. Under Claudius's influence, interest in Etruscan heritage briefly flourished in imperial circles. Yet, by the 2nd century A.D., the Etruscan language had vanished from everyday use. With each generation, Etruscan identity became more Romanized until the people themselves were indistinguishable from their conquerors. And yet, their genetic footprint remained. DNA studies have shown that as late as the 15th century, the residents of Tuscany, formerly Etruria, still carried the markers of ancient Etruscan lineage. Though the language and independence were gone, something of the Etruscans had survived, quietly persisting beneath the surface of Italian identity. Their story is a reminder that cultures don't, simply disappear. They transform, adapt, and leave behind threads that continue to shape the world in subtle, lasting ways. The final documented appearance of the Etruscans on the stage of history occurred during one of Rome's darkest hours. In 410 A.D., as the Visigoth king Alaric besieged the city, panic spread among the Roman population. With hope dwindling, Pope Innocent I and the city's prefect turned to the last known Etruscan haruspices, priests trained in the ancient art of divination through animal entrails. It was a desperate gesture, a symbolic return to the old rites in a time of crisis. The haruspices performed the ritual, sacrificing a black ram and inspecting its liver for signs. Their reading was ominous. The gods offered no favor, and Rome would fall. Shortly thereafter, the Visigoths breached the city's defenses and sacked Rome for the first time in centuries. This final act was more than just the fall of a city. It was a symbolic end to the ancient traditions that had once guided Roman and Etruscan alike. The haruspices faded from history, but their legacy, like that of the people they represented, remained etched into the cultural bedrock of the West. Even in that moment of defeat, the memory of the Etruscans served as a bridge between the ancient world and the world to come. Today, the Etruscans are remembered not just for their mysteries, but for their resilience and the enduring impact they had on Western civilization. Though their language remains largely undeciphered and their political unity was fragile, their cultural imprint is undeniable. They laid the groundwork for Rome's emergence, contributed to the arts, influenced architecture, and introduced practices that became standard in Roman religion and governance. Their story is not one of sudden disappearance, but of transformation, of being absorbed into a greater whole without entirely losing their essence. The rise and fall of Etruscan civilization offer a timeless lesson that identity can endure beyond conquest, and influence can persist even when names fade from maps. From their finely crafted gold jewelry to the painted tombs that still whisper their beliefs, the Etruscans continue to speak across millennia, not through words, but through legacy. Their journey, marked by brilliance, adaptation, and eventual integration, serves as a powerful reminder that what we build, believe, and create can outlast us. In that sense, the Etruscans never truly disappeared. They simply became part of something larger, carrying their heritage into the future under another name. Now that you've followed this journey from mystery to legacy, we'd love to hear from you. What part of the Etruscan story stood out to you the most? Leave a comment below. Your feedback not only helps us grow, it also keeps these ancient voices alive.